Good break?
Pretty
Great break.
chill.
How was yours?
It was good. We used to get 2-week breaks, but ever since we started doing Wednesday and Saturday class, it's like a week and a half. I wish it was just a tidbit longer. I don't know about you all. Well, we actually have somebody new joining. And Shannon, not to put you on the spot, but we have everybody introduce themselves. So I'm gonna have to have you do that now. Are you there?
I am here. You just have to forgive my voice. I've been sick for a couple of weeks.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good.
Yeah, we have Shannon joining us because she kind of already, knew HTML and CSS and everything. And Shannon, do you mind just saying why you're interested in taking the class? And then everybody's answered this question, but something about you that is nerdy.
Okay. I started learning how to code quite a few years ago, but it was just kind of off and on. Then I committed to it pretty heavily last October. So JavaScript is the missing piece to the front end puzzle that I'm trying to complete. So I'm excited to get started. I've done a little bit of JavaScript just on my own, but I feel like a classroom setting would be more beneficial. As far as nerdy goes, I've recently started diving into the world of accessibility. And so I work for a company now where we review websites to see how accessible they are to the public. So I'm learning a lot right now. I'm on overload almost.
Cool. Well, we're gonna add to it a little bit, I think.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I think first class module 2, let's just jump in. So we are starting to learn JavaScript. And for many people, this JavaScript is their first programming language. So we're also trying to orient people around working with a programming language and how those work. So I want to talk real quick though about like at a high level how JavaScript fits into the full web ecosystem and how it fits in with HTML and CSS and what the different responsibilities of those are. And today, actually, we will see a lot of things that I do not expect you to understand, just to give you sort of a full picture. So there's going to be code that we'll write today that you guys haven't done homework for yet. You likely won't understand, but you'll understand like what it's doing, and it should kind of give you a cool idea of the full picture of what JavaScript can do, and why it's so cool. So let me share my screen and we'll jump in. Okay. How is this size-wise?
It's good for me.
Good for everybody else? Okay.
Yep,
Yeah,
looks good to me too.
All right. So what I've done is I've copied over from module 1 some HTML and CSS that we had when we were doing, let me go ahead and just go to live server. And you guys can see the browser as well?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was some HTML and CSS that we did kind of midway through module 1, where we have our nav bar, and then we have these like, it's called like pills or tags in here as well. So this site doesn't do anything. Like if you click on stuff, it doesn't do anything. Like if you click on the user icon, it doesn't do anything. If you go to this input box, you can type. Actually, no, you can't even. Yeah, you can. So you can type, but like if you press enter or keep typing letters, you normally expect it to like auto search for you and start showing you results and things like that. And so there's no interactivity on this site at the moment. There's also like nothing about this that is unique to me. So like there's this user profile, but my name's not there. Like so all of this content is static. It's just whatever the content was in the HTML that we wrote is what we're seeing. So if we look at the HTML for that site, we kind of see all this HTML markup that's here. And the order of this markup in this file is pretty important. And it's roughly the order that it's sort of showing up on the page, right? And so like when we get to this list here, like the order of these in the like line by line in the code file is sort of the order that is showing up on the page. And then if we look at our CSS file, the order here is not so much kind of the same way. This is really just like we could rearrange the order of anything in here and we'd end up with the same result on the page. When we start writing JavaScript files and we actually make JS files, the order of those really matter. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, like, what do you guys, when you guys think of HTML and CSS, what do you guys think of the responsibilities of HTML to start? If anyone wants to volunteer.
Just basic layout.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one is like, I feel like one
Yeah.
is for like the skeleton of it. And then of course, CSS is like the design, the coloring and all that stuff.
Very good. Yeah. There's no like perfect right answer here. I personally think of it as HTML is like what is on the page. Skeleton is also often something I think of. So what's on the page? What's the content on the page? What's the structure of it? And then what about CSS? What is CSS responsible for?
Positioning.
Positioning.
Yeah, just the aesthetics and kind of the overall look and feel for the user.
Yep. Yeah, so HTML is what's on the page and CSS is how does it look on the page. So very good. And then does anyone want to venture a guess of kind of what are the main responsibilities of JavaScript?
Typically think of it just as, oh, yeah.
Sorry, say that one more time, Jeremy.
Oh, I was saying as far as like body parts go, kind of like the brain, like what makes it smart.
Good. Okay, I like that. Anybody else have anything to add?
Making it more interactive for the user.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Good. So when we are looking at this page, those things I called out, clicking on things, typing input, having the content be not static, so having dynamic content. These are kind of the main core reasons why we need to add JavaScript to our page. And you pretty much don't interact with any website at this point without JavaScript. So I would kind of break up kind of what JavaScript is going to do, what we're going to be doing with JavaScript into sort of two categories. So one is handling events. So a big thing we're going to do with JavaScript is say, hey, when something happens, I want to have a certain act, I want to do a certain thing. So when someone clicks on a certain thing on the page, or when someone types into an input box, basically like when a user interacts with the page in some way, which is always like a keyboard click or a mouse click, I want to do something. So with JavaScript, we can say, hey, when this thing happens, I want to then do this. I want to respond in some way. And the way in which you respond is, I mean, there's so many different possibilities to that, but all of it's facilitated with JavaScript. So it's one key kind of category of action that JavaScript handles. The other is making pages dynamic. So rarely are you going to a website at this point and seeing the same thing someone else is seeing. So you can imagine people are not every day like coding away, changing HTML content so that it updates. Like when there's a new article that comes out on a website, no one's going and updating HTML pages and hitting save. Everything is dynamic and is typically driven by a database of information somewhere. And so JavaScript is what allows the page to change based off of who is interacting with it. So you're pretty much always logged into a page. And so it has to show your name and your profile. And also the content that's relevant to you is also based off looking up information on you or looking at what your interests are or whatever. So the dynamic nature of pages is also something JavaScript is handling. And so what that means is JavaScript will have access to certain data or information, and it has to interact with the page to update the page to inject that information in some way. And so that is a big thing that we'll start doing in sort of the old-fashioned way over the next 2 modules, which is we will essentially like query for HTML elements and then change the text within them or like add additional elements to the page to make the page dynamic. And then eventually when we get to React, you'll see kind of the modern approach to making pages dynamic is way easier with React. But that's another key category of JavaScript is, hey, modifying how the page looks with your JavaScript code. So responding to user events and then updating the page dynamically with 2 key things that JavaScript does. So any questions about that rundown or any comments or anything? Okay. All right, so there is a few ways that we can add JavaScript to our page. So right now we've got index.html, we've got style CSS. If I want to just start doing some JavaScript here without making a separate file, does anybody know how to do that?
Can you just make a script tag?
Yeah, exactly. So just like how there's a style tag we can add, somewhere within the HTML to start adding CSS, we also can add a script tag. So I'm going to do that. There's various places you can put it. I'm going to put it at the very bottom of the page, still inside the body though. So I'm going to add that here. So I just do a script tag, and it looks like an HTML tag, with the wrapping. So my JavaScript is sort of like a child of this script tag. And so now by doing this, all of a sudden, everything inside that tag is no longer HTML, it's not CSS, it's now JavaScript. And so I can just start writing JavaScript. Does anybody have, based off the homework that we've done, what like a valid line of JavaScript may be? that I could write here?
VAR space, and a class name.
And when you say class name, you mean just something like this?
Yeah, I think camel case is the typical approach, right?
Mhm.
And then you'll do your colon. And what was it? Yeah,
Equals.
that's right. Equals, and then your declaration of the class before your colon.
You could do strict quotes. Okay,
Yeah,
coders.
number or a string.
You don't. I don't think you don't have to declare. Yeah, you could just. And then your semicolon.
Yeah.
Hey, 1 second. Hey, come here. Spot. Sorry. 5:30 is a rough time because people start walking their dog in front of my house. Okay. All right, so there's a lot happening in this one line. Alex, do you still have your hand up, or was that?
Well,
for
I
the-
just have a quick question, which I'm not fully aware of. For the script tag, does it only accept JavaScript, or does it accept stuff like Python and C++, C# and other types?
Just JavaScript.
Just JavaScript.
Yes, yeah. So the browser is an HTML interpreter, a CSS interpreter, and then a JavaScript interpreter. It doesn't really have any other languages that it supports. So like JavaScript is the language of the web. Now that's not entirely true. They're like adding other things to it. So there's something called WebAssembly you might have heard of, and you can like write in other languages that compile to it. That's sort of a more advanced thing that it's not something that will normally, not something to concern ourselves with. But yeah, so if you're doing the script tag, it's typically going to be JavaScript and definitely not like SQL or Python or anything like that.
So not like TypeScript either.
So, so we can do TypeScript. TypeScript is so this is a bit of a nuanced answer. So TypeScript doesn't actually run anywhere. It gets compiled into JavaScript. So you would write TypeScript, but when it actually gets sent to the browser, it's going to be JavaScript. So like TypeScript is sort of an advanced, most people use it professionally, but it's not actually what's running in the browser. It's something that gets compiled down to JavaScript. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot happening in this line right here. So one thing that's happening is we're declaring a variable. And so there's that's going to happen all the time whenever you want to save the result of something. And so we can now reference by this name, class name, later in our code in order to get the value that is storing. And the value it is storing is whatever the right side. So we have this equal sign. So we're saying, hey, I want to assign what's to the right of this equal sign to the variable class name. And so it's going to evaluate the right side. And the evaluation of the right side is quite simple. It's just a string with the value okcoders. So the type of this here is okcoder, or is a string. Does anybody know like of another type that you've learned about in the homework?
I could do integers.
Double float.
Yeah. So
Arrays and objects.
yes, yeah. So arrays and objects is something we'll cover a little bit later. But yes, you could definitely do arrays or objects. And float and double and integer is pretty correct. But technically there's only one type for that, which is number. So if we say like var test number equals 1, like that's an integer for sure. And then var test number 2 equals, like 2.0 or something, that's a float. But these are both sort of the same type. They're both just number type in JavaScript. And so there isn't like a distinction, though they work differently. There's not like a true type difference between these two. They're both type number. I think those are the main two that you learned about in the homework. There is sort of one other sneaky one that you learned about, which is sort of like a sort of like empty type. Does anybody know which type I'm talking about?
Is it nan with the not a number, or the one that's not indefinite, but the other one?
Yeah,
No.
so nan is definitely one of those sneaky non-types. There's like 3. So that's not the one I was thinking of, but that's a totally correct answer. So there's 2 other besides not a number or nan.
Null.
Null is one of the other ones, and then there's one other.
Undefined, maybe?
Undefined, yeah. So those are all different types. Most types have more than one value. For undefined, null, and nan, there's just one. There's a type, and there's only one version of it, which is that value. So for example, this var my other class name. If I don't give it a value, which you can do this, it's not, I wouldn't normally recommend doing this. There's certain cases where you need to though, but like normally it's good to just assign a value, right, whenever you're declaring a variable. But you can do this. So this is a unassigned variable. And so does anybody know what the value of that is based on what we just talked about? So what's the
Undefined.
value?
Undefined?
Yeah.
Yeah, so my other class name on line 52 is undefined. And this is the other thing I was mentioning earlier is like the order of this script is extremely important. It's not like CSS where like, you can, it doesn't really, I mean, it does matter in that the cascading nature of it is applying it in the order that it's defined. But if there are no conflicts, like you can define classes kind of wherever. With this, like the order is extremely important. Like if I try to reference class name online, like on the line before it's defined, like if I try to do something with class name here, that's very different than trying to do something with class name below it, right? Because above it, it doesn't have the value OK coders. Below it, it does have the value OK coders. So whenever we're adding JavaScript files and whenever we're writing them, the order is very significant. It's the order in which it's interpreted. Okay. So if I wanted to see this like we have a script that we just wrote, right? So if I want to see it run, does anybody like know how I would like find what it's doing or find if I have any errors or like oh, by the way, I don't really see the chat too much. So if you're not too shy, just speak up. But yeah, does anybody know how I like see this run now?
Console.log,
like- Yeah.
and then you'd go and check the inspect in the console.
Yeah, very good. So let's see with console.log the value of class name, which is one of the variables that we define. So yes, so we added console.log, which is this special So we have this special thing called console that's provided to us. That thing has something on it called log, which is a method. We'll learn about methods later. And then there's a lot happening here that many of you may not understand if you've only done, the homework up to this point. But we're actually calling this method with these parentheses, and then we're passing it what we want to see logged to the console. So what we want to see logged to the console is the thing in that class name is holding, the value that class name has assigned to it. So that's what this is doing here. You can console.log almost anything. So if you ever need to like see what the value of something is, or like see if something is doing what you would expect, basically you just start adding console logs and then running your program and seeing what it spits out whenever you do that. Okay, so we've added that, and then yes, correct answer is to open this in the browser. So we'll open it with live server. And then so I'm seeing the page now, but I haven't done anything fancy with the JavaScript quite yet. Like it's not changing the page. I'm not seeing anything, but if you want to see sort of the like area where your code is running, that's called the console. So you can open the console, and so that's Command Option J if you're on a Mac. I think it's Control Option J if you're on Windows. And then you'll get this tab open, which is the same like developer tools tab you get whenever you do inspect. But instead of being on the elements tab, so you'll notice there's like a lot of tabs here. Instead of being on the elements tab, which shows us our HTML, we want to go to the console. And that shows us kind of what's happening with our JavaScript code. So when you log, it goes here, it goes to the console. And so you can see, OK, Coders was logged for us. And it actually sort of tells us where that came from. It has like our file, and it has like a line number. So if we go back, we can see indeed line 53 is what triggered that log. And then you can see there's this live reload enabled, which is like the live server extension is like adding JavaScript to this page to refresh it whenever we save our code. So that's being logged here. We didn't add that code. The live server extension added that code. And then you can see there's some other like dev tools, like warnings that are happening here. If there were any errors in our code, if there's anything that we jacked up, you would also see that here, and it would be like a red line, and it would say like error. So yeah, this is where we can see our code running. And it's anytime something's wrong with your program, this is the first place you should go to see if there's any issues. And then from there, you would just start logging things to see if your program is doing what you expect to debug it. Okay, all right, so we have seen variables, we've seen strings, we've seen numbers. What were some of the things from the homework that we were actually doing with numbers?
Just different basic equations,
Yeah.
add, subtract, divide, all that.
Yeah, well, I mean, just basic calculator stuff, right? Is typically what we do with numbers in JavaScript. So yeah, we can just do, 1 plus 1. I can just type that on a line, right? So like each line is sort of like meaningful, like it's a step in the program. And that's like kind of what these semicolons, you don't have to put semicolons, by the way, but like it'll still work if you don't. But typically it's sort of saying, hey, that's the end of this statement, this expression. It's done. And so like now you can go to the next line, and it's sort of like a fresh execution moment. And so this line of JavaScript here, 1 plus 1, perfectly valid. Like it did 1 plus 1, but like I'm not going to see it anywhere. I'm not logging it. And I'm not assigning it to a variable. So like totally, I saved the file, like if we go back to the browser, like we didn't see it or anything like that. It definitely happened. It did do 1 + 1. But that's a valid line of JavaScript. And then on the next one is a new line of JavaScript. We can do something completely different here. But typically, if you're going to run a line of JavaScript, you're going to be doing something with it. So you're either going to be saving the result of that thing. So typically, you know, we would say like var, you know, basic math equals 1 + 1 so that we can use it later. So we could potentially later do basic math times 2 or something like that, right? So we use like progressively build up the steps in our program, and then we may assign that to something. So we, you know, var advanced math equals basic math times 2, right? So we can start doing things line by line, and typically we're either saving the result of doing something, or we're doing something that has a side effect. And a side effect is like something that changes something. So with JavaScript, if we're not doing an expression that we're then saving the value of, we're pretty much always changing the web page in some way or doing something. And so we might like change the value of an HTML element, or we may add a click handler, meaning like, hey, listen to somebody clicking on this and then do this thing. I think this was most of the stuff that was in your homework. The only other thing in the homework I didn't mention is comments. And so, you know, sometimes you just want to put notes in your code purely for yourself or other developers. And so you know, similar to how you can do HTML or CSS comments, there's just a special syntax for it, which is these 2 forward slashes. And then you can just do whatever you want there. Okay. So I'm going to start talking about some more advanced things not covered in the homework. Is there any questions or anything from the homework though before I do that? Okay, cool. All right, so there's the JavaScript language, which is a programming language, and it has its grammar. So, you know, var, or, you know, we learned about const in the homework, or let in the homework, which is a different type of variable. And there's the equal sign, and then there's the double quotes, and there's like a specific syntax for the language itself, right? That's provided for that's what you can the valid JavaScript that you can write. Now, JavaScript as a language doesn't always run in the browser. So when it first came out, it was specific to running in a web browser, and that's what it's for. But we also write JavaScript for the backend now as well. So you can also run JavaScript on what's called a server to do backend programming, to interact with the database, or to do data processing, or to do things that aren't like specific to an interface that someone's interacting with. So there's the JavaScript language itself, but then depending on where it's running, it has access to what's called APIs. So you've probably heard this term before, API. It's a very abstract, generic term used in many different contexts and settings. It stands for Application Programming Interface, which is sort of meaningless at this point. But when JavaScript is running in the browser, you have access to web browser APIs. So things that you can then do with the web browser. And so console is one of those things. So whenever your JavaScript is running in the browser, you have access to this special word called console, and then all the methods on console which make up its API. So the things that you're allowed to do. So the browser has a ton of APIs available to you that just provide the things that you see the web browser do. So if you just search that, if you search like web browser APIs, and typically Indian or Mozilla is a good one to pick if that comes up first. So we can go to that. And here are all the different APIs available to us that we can then access within JavaScript. And so see if any of these. So there's a geolocation API. Let's take a look at that one. So for example, we can say, if we want in our code to find out where the user is, like where they're located, then we can, this is a line of code right here that you can see. There's this thing that we have access to anytime your code's running in the browser called geolocation, and then you can do get current position. And so this is very similar to console log. Like we just wrote console log in our JavaScript and it did what we expected. We can just write geolocation.getCurrentPosition in our JavaScript and it will do what you expect. Potentially, I don't know what you expect it to do. But if you can open, by the way, on any web page, not just the ones you write, the console, and you can open the inspector, right, to see what's on that page. So we can also see like what JavaScript they're running, or if there's any errors or whatever. And then you can just, you notice you have like this cursor here where you can just start writing JavaScript as well. So if you ever need to just like quickly test some JavaScript, you just on any web page, you can pop open the console and just start writing JavaScript. So I can do 1+1 here, and you can see it evaluated that line and returned 2. I didn't save it or anything like that, but this is what I meant by like it calculated and returned the value of 1+1, though I didn't save it to anything and it didn't change the page or anything like that. But what I should be able to do here, and this may not work because I probably have to set like certain permissions to provide my location and yada yada, but you'll notice like I'm typing geolocation and it's already kind of bringing up that object for me. So geolocation, and then if I do dot, which is to access a method on that thing, there's this get current position. So I'll do, looks like that's undefined. Okay, there we go. Sorry, I have to access it through this thing, which is slightly confusing, but so navigator.geolocation, which is a reference to this thing. Anyways, and then get current position. Okay, and then I typically need to read the docs about like how to actually pass the correct thing to it. Okay, this is kind of some advanced JavaScript where I have to pass it like a success and error handler. So this is not something that you should understand quite yet. But it's something we'll learn about later. So just sort of hand wave it at the moment. I'm actually, let me switch to writing this in our actual code so it's easier for you guys to read. So I'm gonna add it to our index.html. Okay, all right, so let me explain what just happened. So this is kind of advanced code, so don't worry too much. I just want you to understand like the intent of what's happening here. So I'm using a web browser provided API, which is the navigator, which has this geolocation property on it that then provides a method called get current position, which will give me like where like the lat and long of the person wherever they're located. This is an advanced method though, because it doesn't run synchronously. It like has to go do something and then it has to give me the result. And so I have to sort of say, like, once you get the result, then run these other what are called functions, which is another thing that we'll learn about later. But essentially here, there's either it worked or it didn't. And if it worked, the code here is saying log, console log the position. And then if there was an error, console log the error. So that's what's happening here. Get the position, and if it worked, give it to me and I want to log it. If it didn't work, give me the error and I'll log the error. So if we go to the browser, we'll see that I got this geolocation position error, which is sort of what I was expecting to happen, which is like, I haven't given you permission to know where I'm located. And so I'm getting a user denied geolocation. So I'd have to prompt them, so normally when you go to a website that wants your location, you'll get like a prompt that says like, do you want to allow them to get your location? And so there should be another method on the navigator, which would be ask for permission, and it will like ask for permission from the user. So I don't want to, we're going to run out of time if we do all that. But basically, like that's the thing that's available to the developer to do that thing that you see all the time, is like using these web APIs. And so there's a ton of them. So we just kind of randomly picked one. But there's local storage APIs that let you like store session information so that when you refresh the page, they can like persist information. There's, what else is interesting? There's the clipboard API. So you know that like wonderful thing that websites do now, whenever there's something you need to copy and they have a button that like, if you click the button, it copies it for you. So, I mean, what they're doing is using the clipboard API, and basically this has a method on it where you can, let me see. Yeah, so you can read what's in the clipboard, and then you can write. And so essentially what they're doing is saying clipboard.write, and then they're just passing the text of whatever they want to be in your clipboard, which is usually like some URL or something like that. So a lot of this like really cool functionality that you see on the web is often, you writing JavaScript that interacts with these APIs that are provided to you. Okay, so there's a few really important APIs that everyone's pretty familiar with, and one of them is the document API. So the document API is how you interact with what is on the page, like the HTML that's on the page. So, for example, if we want to add functionality to this icon up here, like this little person icon, so that when someone clicks on it, we do something, then we have to somehow with our JavaScript find and attach to that item on the page. So we have to like get that thing that we want to interact with. And so we do that with the document API. And the way that you typically want to find something and attach to it is pretty much always by ID. And so that's like when we were talking about ID and like why ID is important and stuff like that. It is often important because you want to be able to uniquely identify that thing in your JavaScript code. So we have, I think that's this one. I think this is the icon, I believe. Yeah. So if I want to get this one, I need to add an ID to it. So I can do that. And so I'll just make up something like user icon. And now that that ID is there, I can get it in my code. So down here, I can say console, or sorry, not console. I can do document. So that's the API document. And then there's a get element by ID method on it provided to me. And then I just pass it the ID, a string with the ID that I'm using. And so the ID I used was user icon. So user icon. And then doing this, like running this line of JavaScript, will look at the page, get the element that has that ID, and then give it back to me. So like just like this line up here, 1 + 1 gives me back 2, and I can assign that to a variable. Running this line of code gives me back an element on the page, which I can also assign to a variable. So I can say, you know, var user icon element equals the result of using the document API to get that element by ID. Now, you know, what the heck is that thing? And like, what can you do with that? Well, one thing we can do is we can console log it and just see what it is and make sure that it is working, you know, that it found it and it returned it successfully. So like, that's often what you want to do is like, whenever you're running code that you're not for sure, like if it's going to work or what the result's going to be, just console log it and just see if it's, you know, not undefined. And then you can also typically interact with it and see what it is. So I saved this file. So let's go look at the page real quick. Okay. This might be confusing you that this geolocation thing is happening after me getting the icon, because I did this first and then this after that. But I had mentioned to you that this code like had to go do something and then like give it back to me. And so that's why like the code ran to go get the location, but then this code ran and logged before it gave me back the location, and then it logged my location. So that's a way more advanced topic that we won't even get to until like the second module in terms of like synchronous, or sorry, the third module in terms of synchronous and asynchronous code. But anyways, if you're curious, that's why that's happening. Okay, so we have up here our user icon log to the console, and it's like trying to give us like a helpful log here. So it's saying, hey, that I found that. It's a I tag, has an ID user icon, and it has these classes on it. It's just trying to give like helpful information. But then you'll see there's like this caret where I can expand it and see a bunch of like way more information. So whenever you get an element with the document API, you're getting back this special thing called an element that then has a bunch of properties on it and a bunch of methods and things like that that we can call as well. So if you need to look that up, you can look up like document get element by ID if you're wanting to learn more about it. And you can, see the syntax for it here and how it works. And then you can see it tells you what it's returning to you. So it's saying, hey, the return value of that is an element, and the element's clickable. Object describing the DOM element matching your ID, or null if it couldn't find that element. So if we want to see, okay, it found it, obviously. So like, what is that thing it returned to me and what can I do with it? Then you can click on this element thing here. And then this has like a bunch of properties on it that you can access to get information on it. But typically what we want to do is call a method on it.
Mine looks different.
What'd you say?
In the console on Brave browser, it's returning the full HTML element. So mine just looks different than yours. I don't have the, when I click the drop down, it just shows like colon before inside of the icon element. So I was just saying mine looks different in the console log.
Yeah, so different browsers will do things slightly different.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
I just recently switched to Arc. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, whatever Chrome does. Which is, I mean, most people should be using Chrome. But yeah, okay. I'm not sure why it's not giving you more detail than that.
I didn't mean to sidetrack you. I was just,
No, you're good. I know
just thought it was interesting.
questions like that are awesome. So don't be afraid to ask them. But yeah, I'm not sure why it's not giving you more detail. But I mean, this is probably, I mean, doing whatever Chrome's doing is probably the more default standard behavior of a browser, which is just to log the element for you to see it. And you can see this actually looks like HTML. It's like formatting it like HTML for you, which is kind of nice. Okay. So 1 and 2, yeah. So there's a ton of properties for the element. Now there's documentation, like the properties that'll be on it and everything when you're accessing it in your JavaScript code. That doesn't matter what browser you're using, like it's going to be the same for both, typically. But you can see one of the very first instance methods on this is add event listener. So that's like the two categories I was talking about of what we're going to be doing often is really well demonstrated in this just one example of, on the one side of like making the page dynamic and adding interactivity. We like query for the document and get it. And then now we can add an event listener. And the most common event listener is click. So on click, like I want to do something. So I can click on this. And you can see the documents say add event listener and then tell it the type of event that you want to listen for, and then pass me what's called a listener. In this case, it's a function that it will run whenever that click happens. And so I can look down further and see what the options are for type. So it's a string representing the event type to listen for. So then I can look up what the event type is. And I mean, actually, we can, VS Code is probably going to tell us, but eventually we'll see. Oh, I actually don't even see click on here. Oh, okay, mouse. So there's clicked, double clicked, up, down, right click. Oh, that's funny. So the default behavior of Brave was to, when I asked for the location, it like, and I got an error, it went ahead and asked me if I want to give it my location. So you can see that happening in Brave. And that's not happening in the other browser I'm using, Arc. Because it's more, well, I'm actually surprised Brave is doing it too, but I mean, browsers will do different things depending on who wrote them. But yeah, you can see it asking for my location now. So I can give it to it. And we can refresh this and see. It still thinks that I denied it.
I accepted it and mine returned some information.
I think, did I not actually accept it? Anyways, that's not what I want to worry about at the moment. Okay, so we want to add our event listener. So we've got our user icon element, and we can do user icon element dot add event listener. And then the type, it's actually not telling me, which is annoying. I think clicked is what we're looking for, and then I'm going to give it a function to run whenever someone clicks. So I'm just telling it whenever somebody clicks, console log I was clicked. Okay. So if we go back to this page and look at our console and click, well, we're not getting anything. Okay, I think it might be. Okay, it's click. Okay, there we go. So that's one of those examples of where writing code is really difficult. So like I put clicked and I was clicking on this thing and it wasn't working, and like I was not getting an error. Like there was nothing telling me what I messed up. And so like I pretty much knew that surely I just messed up with the event and to look at the docs for what the correct thing is. But like that's something that when you're a beginner, it's like really hard to know what you did wrong. And so you have to like stare at your code and like analyze it like character by character to figure out what might have been what you might have done wrong. But anyways, so we have that working now. So I have an event listener on the user icon element for when somebody clicks on it. And anytime somebody clicks on it, it's going to run this chunk of code, which is just console log I was clicked. So you can see, you know, every time I click, you can see this kind of counter going up just because it will like group the same log for you automatically, that's going up every time I do this. So we're out of time, but you know, normally whenever someone clicks on something, we don't just log I was clicked. We would say, okay, hey, they clicked on their user profile thing. So let's like add to the page, you know, that typical like, you know, like when you click on your icon, you get that like drop down thing, you know, that will have like go to profile, log out. So basically the idea is, hey, whenever they click on that, add to the page the little HTML box that has those links to go to do those things. And so, yeah, that's how we make that happen, right? So we only got to see the first half of what I was talking about that you do with JavaScript of like, hey, attach to the page event handlers whenever they type or click. Next class, I'll show you guys how to actually change the page dynamically. So actually changing the HTML on the page with JavaScript, which is kind of the other large kind of categorical thing we'll do with JavaScript. Okay, so today was super fast intentionally. I will go slower on other classes when I'm trying to make sure that you guys understand concepts. But I really just today wanted to show you some of the cooler things that you can do with JavaScript and to make it, you know, clear that it's like not magic, like it's very within your grasp, a lot of the really cool things you see on the web. So yeah, I typically try not to go over on Wednesdays just because it's a weekday, but if anybody has any questions before we drop off, happy to do that now.
I guess real quick, so standard practice will still be to do most of our scripting in a separate JavaScript file, right?
Yeah, that's another thing that we weren't able to get to today, which is like how to link, just like just like with our CSS, you can just move it to another file and then link it. You do the same thing with JavaScript. And yeah,
Cool.
typically you will always be doing it separately. What's interesting though is when we get to React, it all kind of merges back into one file. Like in JavaScript, you'll have your HTML and your CSS and your JavaScript all kind of in one file. But yeah, typically like before React, we kept everything separate. HTML, CSS, JavaScript totally separate.
Okay. I guess a kind of follow on to that, that's probably not a module one thing either. In regards to ordering your script events, is there a certain interaction with where it appears in the HTML versus the JavaScript file if you do have it in both?
Sorry, you're saying ordering the like event handlers, like the listeners?
Yeah, that sort of stuff.
So like if you let's say we're adding like, I mean, you can imagine how like when you think of a website that you use currently, like how many click handlers there are on it when you load it. Like if you just think about going to a website, and this is just like a pretty simple website, there's a lot of click handlers here, right? So you can imagine maybe there's like, oh, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. Sorry. Like if you go to just a pretty simple website, this is just like a content website. There's a ton of interaction. Now, most of these are nav links that you guys are used to, where you don't have to add a click handler for a nav link. It has default behavior. But let me see. If you click search, for example, this is likely JavaScript because we're not changing the page. We're just like, we're not changing the URL. We're just changing what's displayed on the page. And so we added this like search drop down and changed the page. And then now as I type, and if I press enter, then, that's not going to get anything. But, if you search something and hit enter, then it like triggers. So like I hit enter. And so there was like a on enter event listener, take their search input and then run it and then change the page. And then, it's pulling all this data from a database and then rendering it all on the page for you. So sorry, to answer your question though, there might be like 50 event listeners in one JavaScript file. I have never had to do that. Like I have always in my career written in a framework like React or Angular, that, there's a very specific way to break up your code and keep it clean. And like you never want a code file like it's too big. So we would never have like 50 event listeners in one code file. That would all get sort of split up. But like before, back in the old days, which is like 15 or 20 years ago, before we had Angular and React, people were writing like, they would probably break up a lot of their script files, but they'd all eventually have to get linked back to the whatever page you're on. But in terms of the order though, like you load the page, all of those event listeners get added within milliseconds. So like if you have one event listener after another, the user's not gonna have any idea about that. Like it's all just gonna get added really quickly.
Okay, so as
I
long
mean,
as your variables aren't being like redeclared or anything weird like that, then you should be all right.
Yes, yeah, I think so. If I'm following you correctly.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, all right, I think that's all the time we got. I will see you all on Saturday in person. And then homework is all already kind of laid out for this module, so if you just basically I have like because I don't actually want you to do every single lesson. That's, I mean, you certainly can, but I don't think all of them are relevant, so that's why show my screen one time. That's why when you go to the syllabus, you can see like I literally laid out the lessons to do from each of these things. So that's what these are. So if there's not, so for the pre-work for Saturday, you only need to do, and this is a lot of pre-work, you only need to do these lessons that are on the free code campsite. All right, see you all Saturday.
Thank you.
See ya. Have a good one.
Yeah.